Okay, before I got here to chapter 5, I, Sue Sinatra, I read chapters 3 and 4. 3 was titled Getting Popular in Jail. It had to do with, they had said something, we had no discovery of Miranda rights, so neither the defense attorney nor the prosecution had any clue what the case was really about or what the other party had about the case. So what had come down was two cases here. One of them was for lascivious, a felony, lewd and lascivious conduct, and with a minor, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and misdemeanor. So the questioning of the minor led to a little bit of the jury not to really believe her, and the jury decided against lewd and lascivious conduct with a minor in their verdict, but they had given a verdict for contributing to the delinquency of a minor, which is, I guess, defined by the court as they believed, when he asked for explanation, that they believed that the girl had committed a crime, that he had induced the girl to commit the crime by bringing up false charges against the client, which is, we had just went over perjury. And he didn't, since that's illogical, which we looked up against the great weight of the evidence, here it so happened that the sentence was suspended. So that's an interesting outcome. And then the next case had to do with 3 Irishmen, 2 getting in a fight with a man outside, and the police witnessed the entire thing, but since they were across the street and couldn't hear, what had come up was, just a explanation for what happened, to explain what they saw, and the jury, I believe, bought it. Did they buy it in 10 minutes, actually? So the last one was interesting because we had like a watch dealer, but he was legitimate, and they took him in. They were booking him because they thought he looked suspicious, right, obviously, and with whatever he was doing in his car before trying to sell watches at the bar. And when they asked him to empty all of his things, he had a package. The package had cocaine in it, and they asked where he got it, and he said he found it and picked it up and wanted to see what was in it. And the questioning of like a janitor in the Hall of Justice where this happened was if he had just cleaned, when was the last time he cleaned, was anyone there, would anyone there potentially have cocaine, would anyone there potentially ditch cocaine in a package. And before the district attorney got a chance to question the janitor, he says, Your Honor, I object. And the judge asked for the basis of the objection, and he said, it's not fair. Poole interjected, that's not an objection. The judge agreed. Well, it ought to be, ... quote, end quote. I saw the jury nodding their heads in agreement. My client was acquitted. And so that's kind of how you object illegally. And then his father's advice is chapter 4. And this was his first murder case. 2 people ran up besides a guy who picked up money from bars at the end of every night, shot him when he resisted, sped off. And I suppose he was supposed to defend the getaway driver, but didn't. They took another counsel. But then there was someone involved in the quote conspiracy, and that person took on Mr. Cohen, and he got $500 with a writ of habeas corpus. It was pretty easy because he said there was no jurisdiction. They arrested him in San Mateo, but the crime happened in San Francisco. And then then he was later arrested in San Mateo. I think it could have been robbery or something else, also murder, and or not quite. I don't remember the specifics of why he was arrested in San Mateo, but while he was there, they paid now $1,500, and he showed up to defend the client and was thankful that the client had given no statements or anything. So they really just didn't have anything. They had no basis for holding my client and dismissed the charges. Kind of like that language, want to underline it. And he's like, why were you so calm about facing murder charges when I told you I didn't have any experience with it? And he said what his father's advice was. No basis for holding my client and dismiss the charges. And so what the father said was, if you get in trouble, you get arrested for anything at all, remember this: the first thing you have to do is keep your mouth shut. Regardless of what the police say to you, don't say a word. That's number one. The second thing to do is find yourself the best lawyer you can get, and this is what to look for in a lawyer. Get a lawyer who's either Jewish or bald. They are the best lawyers. He is both, so he had full confidence in him. So then a magazine misstated the case and said that the client had to answer for murder when he didn't. And they settled that for $5,000. And I believe $2,000 of it was returned to the client to pay off what they spent on him for his legal services. So now we're in chapter 5. I Sue Sinatra. Because of my background with Show Folks of America, I came to represent many clients in the entertainment industry, including some of the best nightclubs in San Francisco. This brought me in contact with musicians such as Billie Holiday and Duke Ellington, comedians such as Jack Sue and John Rickles, and Hollywood actors. The best known, however, is Frank Sinatra. My involvement with him came about through a lawsuit I brought to protect a friend of mine, the columnist Jack Rosenbaum. On a Sunday morning in August 1962, I was awakened early by a telephone call from my client, Jimmy Ray Perini. Jimmy went by the name of Jimmy J and published a small weekly magazine about Friday, which featured stories about the entertainment appearing that week in San Francisco's nightclubs. Jimmy would go to the nightclubs and take pictures of the patrons and publish them in Friday, which was distributed free by nightclubs. Jimmy explained that he had been at New Facts nightclub that night before taking pictures of some of the patrons, and was taking a picture of an attractive young couple who were very anxious to be in the magazine. Unfortunately, Jimmy had failed to notice that Frank Sinatra was at the next table. When the flash went off, Sinatra went into a rage and grabbed Jimmy by the tie and started to choke him. Sinatra's 2 bodyguards, both well over 6 feet and 200 pounds, held Jimmy's arms while Sinatra choked him with his tie. Finally, the man came out of the crowd shouting, "You're choking him." And Sinatra let go of Jimmy's tie. George Andros, the founder of New Facts and also a client of mine, came rushing over demanding to know what the commotion was. George told Jimmy to give him his camera, which he did, and Andros handed it to Sinatra, who took it to the hatch check room, took out all the film and tore it up and threw the camera on the ground and stomped it to pieces. Andros, according to Jimmy, then apologized to Sinatra and told Jimmy he would talk to Sinatra and buy Jimmy a new camera. It was still early on Sunday morning, and I was wondering why Jimmy was telling me this whole story. "Were you injured?" Jimmy said it It wasn't serious. I asked what Andrew said he would pay for the camera. Jimmy said $600. I told Jimmy he could sue Sinatra if he wanted to, but that I didn't think he would get much. He might get some punitive damages, but that would be a long process, and he would make an enemy of Sinatra and probably George Andrews too. Broken camera. Nate and Jimmy J examined the camera broken by Frank Sinatra. He decided to let it ride, and I went back to sleep. The next morning was Monday, and I had stopped for a donut and coffee at a cafeteria at 7th and Market on my way from the federal court at 7th and Mission. When I saw the front page of the Examiner, Jack's column was on the first page. What was unusual because Jack usually appeared on the front page of the second section. It wasn't a column, it was a news story with Jack's byline. It turned out to be word for word what Jimmy J had told me the day before. When I got to the office, my number one secretary told me that George Andros had called me and wanted me to listen to the radio because he said he was going to make me famous. I tuned in, and George was being interviewed about Jack's story in the Examiner. George said the incident never happened. Nothing even remotely like what Jack had written took place at the club. Listening to George, you would have thought Sinatra had been in a room at the Vatican at the time. I don't know how he thought he was going to make me famous, but I was a little surprised at George because as far as I knew, Jimmy's story was true. And as for Jack, he had always been helpful to George. I suppose George was afraid of losing his friendship with Sinatra. 3 hours later, it was Jack on the phone. Sinatra's lawyers had called his publisher and demanded a retraction. Otherwise, they claimed they would sue the Examiner for defamation. Jimmy's little dust-up was creating quite a wake. I told Jack not to worry, and I told him to talk to his publisher and tell him to leave it to me. I would take care of it. I immediately called Jimmy and told him to come over to my office with what remained of his camera. When he arrived, I had a shorthand reporter and a photographer there. I had Jimmy tell his story under oath, and it was exactly as he had told it when he ruined my Sunday morning, and exactly as it appeared in Jack Rosenbaum's story. I put the pieces of Jimmy's camera on the little table to the side of my desk and had the photographer take pictures of it. I also had an investigator go out to New Facts to talk to George's employees who corroborated Jimmy's story. That afternoon, I drew up my complaint. James J. Perini versus Frank Sinatra and John Doe's. Yes, John Doe's made it into this. And filed it in the Superior Court as case number 524350, and then took the complaint to the press room of City Hall and left copies there for the reporters. In the meantime, the Chronicle had published a front-page story claiming Jack, and the Examiner had published a false story about Sinatra. When the reporters from the Chronicle read the complaint I'd filed, they were shocked. Nate, why didn't you tell us? You wrote the story last night. If you had contacted me, I would have told you not to write that story. I had nothing against Sinatra. I was just trying to help Jack at the time. I had an office in Beverly Hills, which Ed Burin ran for me, and I had my secretary send a copy down to Ed to see if he could serve Sinatra. Ed Barden called and said he had a young law student who served subpoenas for him. He said I would pay him $100 for serving Sinatra. I said, sure. A week later, Ed Barden called to say he was sending the proof of service. It turned out the City of Hope was holding a dinner honoring Sinatra at one of the big hotels in Los Angeles. The young man borrowed a tuxedo from his friend and went down to the hotel. In front of the room where the dinner was being served, there was a long table of people where people could go and pick up their table assignments. At the end of it were white ribbons saying committee. The young man went over and picked up one of the ribbons, pinned it on the lapel of his tuxedo, then walked into the dining area. When he saw Sinatra, he walked over to him. You're Frank Sinatra? Yes. I've been told to deliver this to you. He handed Sinatra the summons and complaint and walked out. The next day, I received a call from a young attorney in the law office who represents Sinatra. A young man had the theory that I was trying to shake Sinatra down. He went on telling me how important he was because he represented Sinatra and that he was going to prove the incident never happened. I let him talk. After he finished, I suggested that he had accomplished a good deal for his client. Now I would not settle cheaply. I sent Sinatra interrogatories asking about his holdings. The lead attorney in the firm then called me and explained why I had sent the interrogatories. I told him that the conversation I had with his associate, he told me he was going to assign the case to his number one man, and he was sure he would settle the case. But after my conversation with the young attorney in his office, I insisted I would have to have a good settlement. In the end, we settled the case for much more than I would have requested if the young lawyer had been courteous, and Jimmy was able to pay a doctor's bill, buy a new camera, and receive money for the time he spent in my office, and Jack's reputation was safe. I filed my request for entry of dismissal of the case with prejudice on March 13, 1964. Sometime later, I was representing a prize fighter named by the name Thad Spencer. At one point in 1968, Thad was rated the number one heavyweight in the world. Thad was to fight Amos Lincoln on the same card as Muhammad Ali and Floyd Patterson in Las Vegas on November 22nd. 1964, Thad's trainer Willie Ketchum invited me to watch the fight. I took some of my stuff. My son Norman, who was an attorney at that time, Ivor Morris, who was one of my close friends, Mike Berger, another close friend, and a client who had at one time ran an entire state of California, Artie Samish, the lobbyist. Artie knew everybody in Vegas. It was the night before the fight. Thad was with Willie and resting up for the fight. Artie said, "Let's go out on the town." After we saw different shows, Artie said to all of us, "I'm going to give you a real treat. Do you like Chinese food?" We did. We piled in several cabs and proceeded to the Sands Hotel. Artie told us about the cook at the Sands Hotel, Sue Fong. Sue had been the chef at the Don, the Beachcombers in Palm Springs, and was the greatest Chinese chef in the United States. Looking at Artie, one would guess that when it came to food, he knew his subject well. Artie was some 100 pounds overweight. Waiter set the table for us at the Sands. We were about 12 people at that time, having picked up some other friends on the way. As we went into the room, on our right was a table of some 30 people at all, including Dean Martin, Joey Bishop, Corbett, Monica, and in the middle, Frank Sinatra. Sinatra's table had not an item of food on it, and you could see they had been waiting for some time. Artie told the waiter to tell Sue Fong that he was there. The waiter came back with the Chinese chef in a white outfit and big hat. Sue ran over to Artie and vigorously shook Artie's hands. "Artie, what do you want? I want you to pick out. I want you to pick it out. Just bring us some great food." Artie introduced Sue Fong to everyone at his table. Sinatra saw us and came over. "Hello, Artie. I just wanted to pay my respects to you." Artie introduced Sinatra to everyone at my table, too. When Artie introduced me, Sinatra looked at me and gave a wry grin. "Yes, I know Mr. Cohen. I've known Mr. Cohen for a while." Sinatra talked to Artie for a few minutes and then went back to his table. Jack Entrada, the general manager at the Sands Hotel, hearing that Artie was there, also came over to our table and gave his respects to Artie and asked if there was anything he could do for Artie. "You know, I am one who sent you Sue Fong. He's the greatest Chinese chef in the United States. You told me you wanted to open a Chinese restaurant in the Sands, and I told you the best cook would be Sue Fong, and you made an agreement with me that Sue would be the highest paid chef in Las Vegas. I hope you remember that. Don't worry, it's all been taken care of. Sue's happy, and everybody's happy." Then all of a sudden, out came Sue Fong with a table on wheels loaded with all kinds of food, and 2 or 3 waiters shared splitting it up and putting it in front of us. Sinatra's table looked over. They hadn't been served a thing, and they had been sitting there before we'd even arrived. I felt a little embarrassed. We were about halfway through the food when Artie told us not to get stuffed. He said there was going to be a lot more food coming. In the meantime, Sinatra had still not been served. After 20 minutes, Sue Fong came out with another table on wheels serving us again. At that point, Frank Sinatra stood up, took the empty plate in front of him, and threw it across the table, shouting, "What do you have to do to get 85 cents worth of chopped suey in this goddamn joint? Frankie, you're the king. You can have anything you want," one of his entourage quipped. Sinatra stomped out. When Sinatra stomped out, Frank Sinatra Jr. went out after him, and 2 of the 4 bodyguards Sinatra had posted around the table went out with them, but the rest of the Rat Pack remained seated laughing. We finished our meal and went on. The next night, Thad Spencer fought Amos Lincoln and lost on a split decision. There's a picture here of Nate talking to Thad Spencer. in England, 1968. After the fight, Artie asked Thad what we would like to eat. Chinese. Artie told Thad he would take him to the best Chinese food in the country, and we ended up back at the stands. Frank Sinatra was there again, this time in front, while we had a table in back. All Sinatra's party were already eating when we arrived. Jack and Travis spied Artie again and hurried up to him. You've got me in a lot of trouble with Sinatra last night. Fuck Sinatra, Artie said. Loud enough for everyone here. Sinatra and his party went on eating. No one said a word. Of course. Anyway, that's the end of chapter 5. We move on to another topic.